really frustrated with working in policymaking and in workplaces which was so detached from people's real lives and the experience of it, and I got quite cross. So I tried to work out how you could actually fix it, and that's what took me to the Wellbeing thing.
What's so nice about the 5 ways to Wellbeing is it's only 5, and you can remember them and you can see them. They're very visual and very tangible.
But I thought we all bought thousands of pounds worth of equipment and sports gear and tops and all that sort of stuff during the pandemic, that we all have no excuse not to do exercise now.
I think for some people they did a lot of exercise, but if you didn't do that, it did make a big difference, and I think that will be a long tail.
Our general well-being. What is it and how do we improve it? We hear from an expert, the 5 key ways. Hello and welcome to Sketchplanations, the podcast. It was Quintus Horatius Flaccus, aka Horace, the leading Roman lyric poet during the time of Augustus, who said, "A picture is a poem without words." It was Charles Schulz, the American cartoonist and creator of Peanuts and Snoopy, who said, "I never made a mistake in my life. I thought I did once, but I was wrong." And it was me who said all of that just now. I'm Rob Bell, and this would be a very different podcast if it weren't for my 2 canny companions, John O'Hay and Tom Pellereau. Good evening, gents. How are we doing, all right?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, very good.
Quotes there. Interesting
nice quotes.
Quotes from the past. Have you guys got any favourite quotes or any... Do you tend to use quotes in public speaking, that kind of stuff?
I do. Yeah, all the time. I feel, actually, you know what? I think it's one of the easiest ways to make yourself look smart is to borrow all the wisdom of others in their nice pithy quotes and just
way of putting it.
Share that, and people think that you're smart, but you didn't. You just heard it and repeated it.
I'm assuming, because I know you well enough, Johnny, that you do give credit to the original author of the quotes when you show off your new smartness.
I do. I mean, I did a PhD, remember, and so.
What are you saying?
It's all about the quotes.
So what are you saying, that you are really smart?
just trying to make sure that you get that in there. No, I was just the point is you become very rigorous about providing credit and referencing for sources.
Yes. No, but you're always so on it. Always so on it on this podcast and also within your Sketchplanations as well. So it was very much tongue in cheek, but no harm, just to remind everyone that it's actually Dr. John O'Hay.
Yeah, and that's what we should be calling him.
It should be the Doctor.
Dr. Hay.
Tommy, do you use quotes quite a bit?
I write a lot of quotes down and then I forget them, and so that when you sent out this reminder, it was like brilliant. I sort of start reading through all these quotes again, and there's so many. And as Jono has just said and reminded me, I should use quotes more often when speaking.
I use them occasionally. I've been tempted to use them for the intro of the podcast on a number of occasions, but I can't believe I'm about to say this. In the past, I've thought, oh no, I'll come up with something. I'll come up with something different this time, and I'll save quotes when I really haven't got anything, and I'm really scraping the bottom of the barrel. That's not the case. I've just thought, no, now's the time. I
can't think of anything. Let's talk about quotes.
I think the first time I used a quote that I remember was in, here we go, John, I'm right back at you, in my head boy speech at the end of... Yeah,
very good.
So
you still remember it?
Yeah, it was one my dad gave me, actually. It was about lies, damn lies, and statistics. So there are 3 types of lies: lies, damned lies, and statistics. It often gets credited to Mark Twain, but I think it's actually ex-British Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli quote.
To be fair, pretty much everything gets credited to Mark Twain.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Yeah, it's fairly standard. He said a lot of things, but there's a lot of things. I think there was a whole book which is like things Mark Twain didn't say, which are very good. They're all very good things, but he didn't say them.
He didn't say them, but lots of people think he did.
Yeah, I read one about statistics the other day, and I wrote it down. It's the most recent quote that I've saved, which is, "It's easy to lie with statistics, and it's easier to lie without them," which is Frederick Mosteller.
There you go, along the same theme. Statisticians, eh?
I collected a couple because you asked me about quotes.
I did.
And so, I mean, I do have a lot of quotes which I've sort of built into sketches because they're kind of like wisdom in a really like nice pithy
way,
format. Yeah. One of them is not really a quote, but I like it. I think it was from a Nike ad, actually. It was somewhere right now, someone busier than you is out running.
Nice. Oh, that's good. Oh, I do like that.
Oh, that's pretty hard.
Probably my favourite. It's a bit
Go
longer.
on. I'm all ears.
We could do an hour show.
Yeah.
Well, this is it, because
probably be a best show ever.
when you do go, if you go through the collection of sketchplanations, there are, I didn't look actually, but there's probably a good 20 that are based on quotes. John, is that right about that? I'd say
there might be. I haven't done that Nike ad, nor have I done this one, which is from Hugh Laurie.
Oh, great.
Yeah, which is sort of unusual for Hugh Laurie, perhaps, but it goes, it's a terrible thing, I think, in life to wait until you're ready. I have this feeling now that actually no one is ever ready to do anything. There's almost no such thing as ready. There's only now, and you may as well do it now. Generally speaking, now is as good a time as any.
That's lovely. That's lovely. From a lovely man.
Isn't that good? It's a good quote, wisdom to live by, I think.
It really is. The thing is, you can, now with the internet, you can just type in a theme and ask it for quotes, and it will come up with all sorts, right? It's very easy to find a quote about anything, really.
Just type
from Mark Twain or otherwise.
or otherwise.
Yeah.
Now, so I've got one that I actually don't know who the quote is from. I think I listened to it in a podcast, and I quite like this one, that if you can't solve the problem, you're probably trying to solve the wrong problem. There's an example with seatbelts, in the fact that Mercedes spent millions trying to develop better seatbelts in the car, and then someone else completely outside cars invented the airbag, which is a way better way of protecting someone in a crash. And Mercedes and loads of others ended up having to license the airbag.
It's really good.
Yeah, it's good.
I don't know if I mentioned, but my PhD
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Go on.
was on framing in design and framing your design problem. It's a really good example, actually. I wish I'd known that before, of reframing your problem there. It's really good.
Well, I have one on the wall just in front of me here now, and it's...
Is it next to your head boy certificate? Or your first class honours certificate?
Didn't get first class, mate. Don't rub it in. God.
It's next to his marathon medals.
Thanks, Johnny. Yeah. No, so this one says, hold it, fellas. I'm afraid you're just too darn loud. And that is from Back to the Future. So there you go. I don't know. I'm not going to read anything into it.
It's just good. Takes you back.
Either you know it or you don't. But yes, I thought there might be some mileage in quotes, because knowing you two, I feel that quotes are probably quite a large part of how you enjoy communicating at times. When are people going to start quoting you boys? When's that going to happen?
Are there any John O'Hay quotes in amongst the sketch
I'm trying to think.
Or Rob Bell
I've written
ones?
a lot of stuff, so if you see anything you like, feel free to quote me.
Yeah. But do credit John O'Hay.
Just make sure you credit.
Please do.
Absolutely.
All right then. Well, listen, to motivate us into this week's episode, I'd like to end on one final quote. It's a quote from British superstar actress Keira Knightley, and one I think will probably resonate with you two chaps and a lot of people listening as well. She said, "It's not every day you get to do a pirate movie. You might as well go for it." Thanks, Keira. So let's batten down the hatches, splice the main brace, and set sail. Here's the podcast. This week, we've selected the sketch entitled 5 Ways to Wellbeing. And it's based on a large amount of research that's been condensed into a very simple framework to try and improve mental capacity and mental well-being. It was developed by a UK-based think tank called the New Economics Foundation. And Jono's sketch for this framework, in my view anyway, beautifully depicts those 5 ways to well-being in one very engaging scene. And you should be able to see that sketch on your screens now for this episode, but if not, you can check it out at sketchplanations.com, and the link for that is included in this episode description. Whilst I'm at it, I'll bung in a bit more podcast admin to say a huge thank you once again for all your correspondence on last week's quickfire episode. We'll be going through some of your messages as usual at the very end of this podcast. And if you'd like to get in touch about the podcast generally or any of the topics we've covered so far, you can email us. Tommy?
hello@sketchplanations.com.
Right, now this episode is, well, it's a first for us because this week we've invited an expert guest to come and contribute to our discussion. Nancy Hay is currently the Executive Director for the What Works Centre for Wellbeing, the UK's national body for wellbeing evidence and practice, aiming to understand what governments, business, communities and people can do to improve wellbeing. Prior to that, she's worked in the UK Civil Service for 9 different departments, a lot of that integrating wellbeing into public policy. And in her spare time, Nancy is also Jono's sister. Nancy, hello. Welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me. It's brilliant to be here chatting to you guys again.
You know all of us, right? You know, we've all met and hung out loads of times over the years.
I have.
Once or twice.
Yeah. But I've never had an online chat with you, Nancy. So, you know, this is different.
Yeah, it is. And actually, I don't think I've seen Tom for years. So it's fantastic.
It has been a very long time.
So usually I throw to Jono at this point to explain what this week's sketch is all about. But I think we'll come back to that in a minute. Before we get into the detail of the sketch and the 5 ways to wellbeing, can we first talk a little bit about wellbeing generally and where your obvious passion for it and your passion for integrating it as far and as wide as possible, where that comes from?
So I got really frustrated with working in policymaking and in workplaces which was so detached from people's real lives and the experience of it, and I got quite cross. So I tried to work out how you could actually fix it, and that's what took me to the wellbeing thing. But also, so much of the wellbeing thing is often about courses or someone who wants to train you in doing stuff. And I was like, this is great, really interesting. But how do you make that more common in everyday life? How do you make it a thing that people do, and that how do we build what it is that we want to happen, not just the things that, just getting rid of the things that we don't want to happen. So the wellbeing thing is about the personal wellbeing bit, is like feeling good and functioning well. And it's made up of the sort of yourself and all the things that are in you, both mentally and physically, and what you've, like the context you're in and the external circumstances you're in, and they interact with each other. And so it can feel quite complicated. It can feel like everything and nothing, but there are some real practical things. And I really wanted to make that practical. There's also a whole national context to it as well, which is how we're doing as individuals, communities, and as a nation, and how sustainable that is for the future. And that's like taking it to a whole other level. But we're talking about personal well-being today. We are.
And that's a really good differentiation, I think, Nancy. And I think where my mind has led is how individual well-being does contribute nationally, possibly even globally as well.
Yeah, definitely. You're not an island, you are interconnected. And that's what makes it quite confusing. Like, where do you start?
Yeah.
Like, when you start pulling one bit of string, it's all connected. So trying to make that practical and a sensible and a conversation, it's kind of always yes and with well-being, which is quite frustrating, but you can still make it practical and actionable.
Can I just say that I love that we have my sister on the podcast, and when we were talking about doing this sketch, this 5 ways to wellbeing, it's so cool that the most qualified and knowledgeable person that we could think of to talk about well-being happens to be my sister, and so hopefully you can see that already. It's really cool.
It's really nice to chat to someone who really knows what they're talking about.
You know, this is not what we talk about all the time in family gatherings either. It's really about did you bring the sausages or something?
Okay, so let's focus there. That's Jono's voice back in. Let's focus on the sketch for a minute, Jono. What was it about this, the framework of the 5 ways to wellbeing, that caught your attention? Why were you inspired to do this sketch?
I'm sure, Nancy, you shared this framework with me, either directly for a sketch or just in general, like with the family. And it's just such a lovely, clear framework. I feel like it's easy to have well-being as this sort of vague thing, which is quite hard to put your finger on. And what's so nice about the 5 ways to well-being is it's only 5, and you can remember them and you can see them. They're very visual and very tangible, the things that connect, be active, take notice, keep learning, give, as I'm sure we'll get to. And I remember thinking, I've done some sketches where, you could do 5 separate things, but I just thought it might be nice to see, could you put all of this in just one visual? Actually, I haven't done many like this where it's a bigger sketch than normal, and I've just tried to sort of put it all in there at once, and it's quite nice. Like, it doesn't really have any writing, does it? It's like, just like let the picture do the talking. This is all you need. 5 ways to build. You can go read the thing, but you don't need to read the thing because you can kind of see it all there. That was the idea.
I think it's brilliant, and for those of you looking at it, you'll see that it's this scene in a park, and there's lots of lovely things going on. Yeah. So before we get into those 5 different ways, this was all based on quite an extensive amount of research, wasn't it, Nancy? I think that's quite important to mention before we get into it.
Yeah, so it sounds really simple, and although it's not a direct line from the research, it is built entirely on this Government Office for Science report in 2008, and it's a foresight report onto mental capital. And these reports are ways of bringing together knowledge of the foresight, so the cutting edge of where the science was in 2008. And this one was there's a whole series of them, but this particular one in 2008 was a massive landmark product that everybody was so inspired by. And the 5 ways to wellbeing came out of that as a way of describing practical actions, the things that you could do as a result of it. And I think, if anything, the evidence for these 5 ways has increased since 2008, each of them individually and more broadly around mental capital. It's an area that was such a part of the foresight. It's absolutely grown globally. It's really exciting field to be in.
Yeah.
Jono's sketches are often very good, but this is a really this could easily be a kind of government international advertising campaign poster, and it's certainly the kind of thing you should have up on your wall to remind you of the different areas.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you about before we got into it, Tommy, about how conscious you are as the leader of a group of people within your company. How easy is it to be conscious of your team's well-being day to day?
So possibly one of the biggest things that leaders often forget, I think, and certainly I do, is how much of an effect your personal well-being can have on everybody else. And how it's really, really important to put yourself in a good place when you're a leader, and if you're not, to get yourself back in a good place, or just not allow that to percolate through. And even if you sort of try and hide it, often it's not possible to hide.
All right, well, let's dig down into the 5 ways of wellbeing, shall we? Number 1. So I should be that's start at number 5.
When you start at 5,
yeah.
Come on.
So the first theme is connect, where we're advised to proactively connect with the people around us, our family, our friends, our colleagues, or neighbours, which on the face of it, I guess, seems a very, very sensible and social thing to do. But what are the specific positive effects of connecting with others for our general well-being, Nancy?
It actually matters at a sort of really physical level to our body. So we sort of we notice other people, but it matters because if you look at the real building blocks of mental well-being, which is what we're talking about here, quite specifically mental well-being, you've got feeling positive about yourself and feeling cheerful, so literally feeling happy, and both of those key components are driven by feeling close to other people. And so not only does it matter in and of itself, it's a massive driver of everything else, whether that's at work, family, friends, neighbours, all of it matters. I think the other thing is to say is that hell can also be other people, right? So some of the biggest challenges we get are through our connections, and so you need to top these up. They really matter.
I was thinking of this because it's easy to think of connect like you have to be with loads of people, but it's not necessarily that, right? I was thinking about like introverts and extroverts, and how you recharge, and you can recharge just as much with a really good conversation with a close friend as other people might recharge going to a party or going to a bar, right? And seeing lots of people.
That's true, but there's different levels. So there's sort of your close and immediate friends, and some of us get more than that thread. And that meaningful relationships really matter. So caring about other people and them caring about you. Then there's the looser connections that you have. So sort of the nod to the neighbour as you put the bins out, or the colleague you just sort of pass at sort of the coffee point as well. So those sort of looser social connections. So every moment, small positive social interaction builds relationship, builds trust, and they all matter. And because you don't notice the positive things as much as you notice the negative things, you really need to top up these positive social connections, and that builds trust, it builds relationship. And we need that bigger level of trust at a societal level, as a community level as well. So, and it's the thing that, if you notice during the pandemic, it's the thing that kept us going, that sort of peer support and the helping other people, that sort of connection happened. The other one was really surprising, was the radio. So radio was a really positive support of social connection. Well, I love the podcasts actually, because that was a way of connecting and feeling connected to other people, that was totally possible to do whilst we were isolated. And for some people, it's a core bit of how they connect with the world every day.
It's very much that individual want and need for connection, isn't it? And we're all different in that sense. And I guess there's no set rule in terms of how much and how deep a connection you need to have.
That chatting in the community context matters, even if you're really lonely. It can protect you from feeling, if you're feeling lonely, you haven't got those personal connections, those loose connections really help protect and buffer you from that. What's interesting is in the UK, we're quite low on Connect. Particularly for 25 to 64-year-olds, we're not so good at it.
So as part of the research here, we've got comparisons with the UK and other countries globally, or in Europe? Across Europe, okay.
Yeah.
What was that? We're quite low in the UK on Connect.
So we're not
generally.
As good at generally, and particularly between the ages of 25 and 64. And it's not particularly necessarily because we're working more than other people, although that is true. So there is something British here about Connect that we're not quite doing. We can improve.
I don't know if this fits into Connect, but I was thinking about watching sports and whether that is a part of it. But there's a few bits of it. Like one is, go into a stadium and just be in with 10,000 other people with the same sort of purpose, but also like the people that you go with, the chat before the game, all of that stuff. I was wondering, whether watching sports plays a big part in Connect in some way.
Yeah, I really love these ones. So it's all moments of positive social connection. And that's exactly what happens when you're doing something enjoyable together. So it's that little comment to the guy that you always see when you go to the football, like the little nods when you sort of see, oh God, they brought that player on again, or whatever. Those sort of connections that you have throughout it. So yeah, those shared, interested, fun, ideally, activities really do make a difference. And actually, the other really clever thing about these sorts of communities is that often there can be people who are quite different from yourself. And that sort of, so you start to get to know somebody in a very different context. Maybe you support the same team, but actually you've built that relationship even when you haven't necessarily got a particularly, maybe you work in completely different industries or you don't work at all, or and those connections can come particularly intergenerationally, for example.
One area where I think I get that is with my physical neighbours. We just happen to live on the same street, and it's really lovely. Completely different jobs, completely different ages. It's brilliant. I love it. And there's the sense of community, and you're all moaning about, the same stuff that the council's not doing for you.
Or the weather, yeah, it's classic.
Or the weather, yeah. Yeah.
You mentioned the pandemic, Nancy, and I feel like of all of these, perhaps Connect might have been affected the most. There was stuff going on with our neighbours here, which was great for us, and we had a family, but not everybody, like colleagues at work. It was just them for 2 years in a room with some housemates they didn't really know very well. I was just wondering, how the pandemic affected that.
Yeah, so it's a really interesting one. So it did weird stuff. One of the biggest coping mechanisms was connecting with family and friends, online and in person. And you'll notice that when you had meetings or something online during the pandemic, you'd spend half the meeting just chatting through the experience of the pandemic. And you suddenly were online all the time in those meetings and sort of processing it. And that's that version of connection that we all had. So it didn't affect loneliness, certainly not as immediately as I expected it to. But we do now have probably 500,000 more people who are chronically lonely in the UK as a result of the pandemic. So this is people who say they're often or always lonely. And that is a real worry, because if it becomes entrenched, there are other knock-on effects to health and work and other things as well. And the sort of things you start, this really great sort of thinking on friendship about how long it takes, sort of over 9 months to rebuild, move from acquaintance to friend and back again. And so if you think about it, we probably moved a lot of things. We got to know some people really closely, and then a whole load of friends sort of drifted out into that acquaintance section. And how do we bring them back again? Is the challenge. It just takes time and repeated meetings.
Yeah, repeated connections. Yeah. Great. Okay, let's move on to number 2, which was be active, which in my mind, at least, is probably the most well-known, at least the most well-talked about aspect of mental well-being, I'd say, is how strong that tie is to your physical well-being. Is that what we're talking about here?
Yeah, we are. And it's interesting that you say it's obvious. So men are more likely to participate in this one than women. Women are more likely to connect and give, and men are more likely to be active. And that's quite a typical pattern that we see. And also, one of the things, I think this has slipped off the radar a bit in terms of mental well-being recently. People think of the things that they really want for their future as a job and money and mental health. And they often forget about this physical health one and physical activity. And it's one of the big impacts of the pandemic, actually, is the big drop in physical activity. But it is the one that often people equate most with wellness and well-being, yes.
Something that we did was an initiative from a really good friend of ours who basically said, look, we don't see each other as much as we used to and as much as we'd like to, and none of us are working out as much as we mean to and should do. So let's get together and work out together. And so he started a club where we met up in a park every Tuesday night, and it went on for 10 years, actually 10 years, pretty much every Tuesday night. I think it was the pandemic that finally killed it.
Yeah.
And it was amazing because genuinely it was amazing. And the format was really simple. So I think everybody, if you're wondering about this and you have those same problems, you should try this. The format is that you just rotate who leads the workout session. So if you've got 6 people, you do one every 6 weeks. And what it meant was that we saw some of our best friends once a week, every week for nearly 10 years, and we stayed in shape. And I just feel like it was such a mega win, and it's such a simple format that anybody can do.
And some of the most unique exercises you will ever see.
There's a lot of creativity involved.
There's a lot of creativity involved. Rob, I seem to remember you brought almost an entire piano once, just one of the most incredible games.
So, I mean, not all of them were actually that good for your physical well-being. But,
there's one with eggs, I remember.
At least we were connecting as well at the same time.
Having fun. Yeah,
Exactly.
sort of stuff. Absolutely. And actually, just getting together with other people is a great idea for exercise. Outdoors with other people, always a winner. It does matter that you enjoy it, actually, as well. So a lot of the benefit of exercise is because you enjoy it. And so that's great for those that enjoy it. And they also get these other benefits for mental and physical health and the social health that you've described as well, sort of confidence, happiness, relaxation, all those sorts of things. But for those of you who don't like exercise, it is what we would call an experience good. So you need a nudge towards it, and finding something you like and that you do matters more than anything else. So any is better than none in terms of physical exercise.
Nancy, you mentioned something there which confused me, that people are not doing as much exercise post-pandemic. But I thought we all bought thousands of pounds worth of equipment and sports gear and tops and all that sort of stuff during the pandemic, that we all have no excuse not to do exercise now.
I think for some people, they did a lot of exercise, and it was one of the things. I think gardening actually was one of the weirdly popular, very effective things during the pandemic. But if you didn't do that, and a lot of people didn't do that because it wasn't no longer part of their daily life, it did make a big difference. And I think that will be a long tail from the pandemic here.
Well, one of the things I remember really struck by, mostly in Vietnam, was this national culture of like getting together at like 5 a.m. in the morning on a street corner and doing Tai Chi or equivalent. And it was just fabulous. There'd just be, literally it was a street corner. There'd be like one person who's sort of leading the exercises, and people would just pop up and stand wherever that they could see the person and just be following these exercises. I just thought it was a lovely thing, and everybody was up early, just getting a little bit of exercise, a little bit of calm meditation. You're doing this with people. It just seemed like a fabulous thing. Which, I don't know.
Yeah.
In the UK, was it you had to be doing a boot camp and doing 50 burpees instead. It's just such a different thing to being doing some quiet, mindful Tai Chi together.
I think the weather affects it as well. Someone suggested the best way to get people to exercise is to put a roof on the UK.
It works at Wimbledon.
It would make a difference. Wouldn't it? Yeah.
So we're talking here about our physical health having a positive effect on our mental well-being. Does it work the other way around? Is that reciprocal as well?
Probably, yes. So when you do exercise, you feel happier and more purposeful at the time you do it and just after. And then it contributes to your physical health. And that physical health is one of the biggest drivers of overall life satisfaction. It's the thing that also helps us be resilient to life events. I think one of the challenges is that when people think of well-being or mental health as only being about physical fitness, or that's the only way they get their mental well-being, then you've got a challenge. There's other things that also matter too. And there can be some downsides of physical activity, sort of injury, perfectionism, pressure to perform, and other types of things as well. But on balance, being physical active is such a good thing. I think if it was a pill, they'd prescribe it.
Well, let's get on to number 3 in the 5 ways to well-being, which is take notice. And now, whereas I said in my mind alone, number 2 about being active was probably the most obvious. This was probably the least obvious to me, but it's probably the one that I like the most, because the thought of being more conscious to do it more often, I get excited about that, I think. But it does feel slightly less tangible than the others, maybe.
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting one. I think the evidence in many ways has probably grown more in this area than some of the others over the last 15 years. And so take notice was often quite a sort of a shorthand for mindfulness, possibly. So sort of awareness and attention, paying attention to your surroundings. And there is quite a lot of science of attention now. And in fact, our attention is at a premium and it's used in lots of different ways. But it's partly about sort of noticing and appreciating what's around you. That thing I said about sort of we notice the negative things more than the positive things.
Yep.
We sort of actively need to notice the positive things like beauty, things like anything that's of interest is then meaningful to you. Sort of enjoying the moment, really taking time to notice it and being part of that something bigger than yourself. So there's a whole load of things in that take notice bucket, but you're right to say that it isn't the most obvious. So we're quite low on this in the UK, particularly compared to, say, France and Germany, for example.
I'm very interested by the participation in 5 ways by age of category, so showing that take notice, you're kind of at your lowest in your kind of early 40s, late 30s, and it then sort of starts really shooting up. The graph, and having been one of the lowest, when you get to sort of plus 65, it's one of the sort of the highest.
One of the places we lived in the States was a little block with 4 small apartments, and the one above us, there was a little old lady who'd lived there for 30, 40 years, and we lived on this. It was a normal street, normal houses all the way down, and they had lovely trees like maples that in the fall the leaves would turn a lovely colour. And it's so often we'd be coming back and it's a busy day, whatever, and there's lots of traffic around. Everybody's just got back from their commute, and she'd just be like going super slowly because she was old, and she'd be like bending down and she'd be picking up one of these leaves, and they turn the beautiful like burgundies and oranges and yellows in the fall. And you'd see she just have like 3 leaves in the hand, and I don't know, she might have taken like 30 minutes to walk the 20 meters or something, but she had this beautiful collection of leaves. It struck me as such an example of like taking notice.
I'm assuming there's a certain amount of taking note, Johnny, within the artwork that you do, within the illustrations, the sketches.
Yeah, it's a beautiful facet of doing art, is that it forces you to notice stuff really carefully, and you look at the wall and there's like 2 different shades of blue, and you're like, okay, could I pick out that shade of blue? And it's funny how, like, with perspective, that is actually the same size of that as if I really do it. And the shadow there is dark. I would have done it grey, but it's actually dark green. So yeah, absolutely. I think is
that something that comes up, Nancy, along under this heading, kind of art, being creative, using your hands?
Yeah, so we look at creativity and culture and arts, and actually one of the reasons I'm on the board of what's called the National Centre for Creative Health, and for exactly this reason. So it's a way to do all of what Jono has described not just doing a course or learning about how to be well, actually doing it in practice. And it's very common way of dealing with people intervention for people with mental illness, because it's a happy thing to do as well, usually. So yes, art's a fantastic way to take notice, and actually it takes me to the children's one slightly, which is in the children's one they have be creative and play instead of give. There's no reason why that isn't true of adults or vice versa. It's just that you needed 5 ways to well-being that were on your hand, right? But be creative and play is another way of describing some of these things that happen that are so human and really, really good for our mental health.
So at the base of this, is some of it about getting out of what I've heard called as self mode?
I think it can sometimes get you out of your head if that's kind of like, sort of, particularly if you're ruminating or really overthinking something. It does take you back and connect you with the real world. And actually, it's one of the reasons why when I'm doing art or something, I don't like to do it on the computer because I spend all my day on there. I like to do it physically, like making things with your hands and doing something. I think you do woodwork type things. That type of thing is a really good way to get you out of your head and into your body. But I think one of the things, actually, Tom probably just touched on this really, when if you're a 2-year-old and you're totally absorbed in your world, it can take you 4 times as long to get to where you need to be because you're spotting every bug and every leaf. And that is totally in the moment and totally in self mode. But it is the opposite of being connected to what else needs to happen in the world. So there's probably 2 ways of thinking about that.
Yeah, there's a friend of mine who I had a chat with him not too long ago, actually, and he was saying that amongst his friends, those who were probably the least happy were typically the people who were less busy than he was, because he's a very happy chappy, and that maybe they had too much time on their hands to be thinking about themselves and their own lives. So yeah, being in their own heads a bit too much. So
there's a wonderful optimal time use stuff as well. If you read Happy Hour by Cassie Holmes, she's looked at the American time use data, and there's like a peak busyness and a peak leisure time that is around as well. So yeah, being too busy is not good, obviously, but being too unbusy is also not good as well.
As with everything, there's a bit of a balance, isn't there?
Just point out, Robbie, I thought it was really interesting that you sometimes might need a prompt to take notice, and that this might not be as completely obvious. And I think one of my favourite sketches is a quote, which is from Kurt Vonnegut. It's actually from his uncle, but he quoted a lot in some of the speeches he did, which was just to notice when you're happy. And he says, if you're in a nice moment and you're just looking around and you're like, this is really nice, just stop everybody and say out loud, if this isn't nice, I don't know what is. And I think that is taking notice. And as you said, we notice the negative bits more than the positive, and that's actually to an explicit like reminder and instruction to go, you know what, when things are really good right now, we should take notice.
Yeah. So I wonder if there are ways to prompt ourselves to take notice more if it's not something that we consciously do.
Yeah, there's lots of cool little ways to do this. I think there's apps that help you do it and all sorts of things. You can build it into your day. So Paul Dolan's Happiness by Design is a way of thinking about how you can build this into your day. So you just notice it more. So it just happens naturally.
Lovely. Good. Well, let's keep moving and get on to the 4th, which is keep learning. I mean, that's a pretty obvious one, that, isn't it? And Johnny, so you mentioned it in the sketch. I think, have you got a couple of things about keep learning here, or is it just the guy doing a painting that you've used to represent keep learning?
Somebody comfortably sat on a bench reading a book.
Okay, good.
Also learning.
So I was wondering how this relates to our kind of formal education system, and if there's a tendency for people's propensity to keep learning dropping off the further away they get from that formal education that we all get at the beginning of our lives.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think in the workplace, very often there is quite good evidence that older workers are overlooked for learning or don't feel that there is capacity to develop. So I think there is something sort of institutional about it. We think we've done our learning now, this is our career, then we sort of stop, and people get stuck actually, and then they need sort of, how do they branch out? And so always being able to find something interesting and that you can learn is a really good skill for life. It's called metacognition. But learning I love, and there's other sketches that relate to this concept actually. That's what it's trying to get at here, is this idea of flow, of mastery, of having interest in something and meaning. And learning doesn't always actually feel good actually at the time. It can be quite hard. Again, that Types of Fun podcast here is probably quite relevant. So that learning pit in the middle, I think, is also true. So learning how to sort of take learning how to learn is a skill, and often smart people don't always come out with that. If you've always found it easy to learn, if you always found it easy to knock out the exams without having to put a huge amount of effort in, well done you. But actually that can make you avoid learning because it doesn't feel very nice when you've got to try a bit hard.
Oh, wow,
So this is great. This is about having interest in stuff and sort of flow and mastery. Computer games are like completely designed to be perfect at getting you flowing.
Okay.
So they sort of up the ante, so it's not too difficult at the beginning, and it kind of gradually gets hard. Is that because that's often the thing about sort of learning as you get older? Like, I'd love to learn French, I'd love to learn to play the guitar, I'd love to learn to play the piano, for that. And it's just that learning takes a huge amount of time, and it's not easy on many of these sort of things.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the reasons why some companies have like a 10% learning time for yourself, because they realise that gives you sort of autonomy, control, interest, and it keeps you moving. And actually, we do see quite a big boost on sort of culture and leisure learning, particularly for those who've got particularly low well-being. Culture and leisure learning can be really, really impactful, as well as the workplace learning too.
What's culture and leisure learning? So would culture be like languages, cooking, art?
Basically anything that isn't work.
All right, okay.
Culture, we understand it really broadly, but something that is interesting to you, that is, like arts or all of these sorts of things. But the internet is just absolutely brilliant at this, right? You can find an expert or learn from an expert on so many different people, and it has huge potential. It's learning that the joy is in the process as well. And so I've deliberately tried to teach myself art, and with the entire goal of not being actually any particularly good at it, but just to enjoy it. And always having something at work that I'm learning about, whether that's a concept I need to understand a bit more or something like that.
So that sense of achievement and learning, they are related, but they are quite different when it comes to mental well-being.
It's like the holiday. Part of the joy of booking a holiday is in the build up to it, the researching about the place, and what happened in the pandemic is we kind of couldn't do that. So it was like a collective sense of anhedonia, which is this loss of happiness that we're looking forward to, because you couldn't trust that it was going to happen as well. So you're learning to enjoy the process and not always being happy, because it's not always, there's lots of positive emotions, and they're not all about yay, brilliant. Some of them are like, oh, this is interesting. Oh God, this is hard. Oh wow, okay, I found my way through. That curiosity.
But how do you go about kind of, because you understand this stuff, right? And you've been aware of it for a long time. So I try to structure my exercise, but I don't try to kind of book in my learning time. And I definitely book in seeing friends. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and actually I think this is quite interesting. So in midlife, your time is quite compressed. You're working, you've got family, all those sorts of things. So, and that's one of the reasons for the midlife crisis, is you're doing lots of things you have to do, and not necessarily all the fun things. And sometimes the things like your fitness or your learning can drop off as a result. How do I structure in learning? At work, everybody has a learning goal that they're trying to improve on that quarter. And I have one for the year, and then we all do learning together as a team once a month. People are sharing learning that they've done with the team, and that's particularly effective because that consolidates your learning when you explain it to somebody else. That's really, really helpful way of learning.
Yeah. Johnny, I won't ask you about you. You are always learning about 8 or 9 different things.
I'm still stuck on the video games are so good, and you're absolutely right. And I was just like, if Nintendo made piano their game, it would be so much more fun to learn the piano, and people wouldn't get stuck. If Nintendo did tennis courts, you wouldn't have 5-year-olds trying to whack the ball and the other side, and the ball's too hard and the net's too high and the racket's too heavy. It would all just be perfect and fun, and you'd be on level 3 and then level 4. And
yeah, I know. I've long wanted to bring out a range of sports sort of equipment that makes games into like computer games. You're like on a tennis court, why aren't there things that, like, when you hit it, it buzzes or it flashes or it counts up your score? Just stuff that make sports more fun.
All right, let's move on to the 5th and final way to well-being, which is, we've mentioned it a couple of times, give. Pure and simply, is this altruism?
Yeah, frankly, it's about helping other people, and literally thinking about it as helping is probably the best way to think about it, really. If you think about 2 of the things that really stand out for high well-being places and societies and communities and workplaces is peer support, and people help each other. And so this is a really good one. Interestingly, it has been dropped by some frameworks. So on an NHS one I saw recently had be active, get good sleep, learn new skills, connect with new people, and not give. And that was because some of the feedback they had from the staff was that women tend to give and connect more than men. And some people overgive would be what I would say. And they tend not to look after their own well-being.
Yeah.
But generally,
Okay.
giving and helping is a good thing, and it feels good to do, and it is good for the rest of the community as well.
Would we interpret this that everybody has that capacity to give, and it doesn't? I mean, it definitely doesn't matter about your financial status or even how busy you are. Everybody has that capacity.
I think it's one of the things that's easiest to do in a workplace or somewhere else. So if you're new, you can be part of it immediately if you can help. And so it's a great work skill and a great thing to encourage in the workplace. But generally, help around the house, help your team. And the more formal aspects of that are things like volunteering, about being on a board. There's loads of more formal ones as well.
It's so nice, the small stuff here as well. And actually, I think like giving tends to help the giver as much as the receiver in many times. And there's to go back to quotes, there's a really nice quote I found, which is, you can always give something, even if it's only kindness, which is from Anne Frank. We had a really good friend, and when he come around our house for we'd invite him for a dinner or something, and he would bring like a really nice peach he got at the grocer's on the way over. He'd be like, "Here's this lovely peach," and it was such a lovely thing, because you take notice of this lovely peach, you're connecting with a friend, and you know, he didn't spend a fortune or anything. He just bought a peach, but it was lovely, and we all shared it together. You know, so I think it's really nice. The giving doesn't have to be this big thing.
Did you invite him back out of interest?
Yeah, who is this guy? I'm going to invite him around my house.
And he brought different fruit that was in
peaches.
season. It was great. Thank you, Dan.
There's potentially the flip side of giving is obligation, where you feel you have to, and it can feel like a burden, and you can also feel obliged towards somebody else as well. So someone's giving you something, you feel back, and that can cause tricky bits. But on balance, giving and helping is generally a good thing for most people.
Yeah.
It's quite a tricky one. This is quite nuanced, but basically helping out and caring about something that's bigger than yourself and helping make that happen is a really positive thing. Your friends that organise that the sports group that you did every week, organising that is a giving thing that you're doing for the collective and endeavour. So it's kind of an active citizenship, I suppose, something bigger than yourself. This is definitely one that gets you out of self mode.
Yeah, there are some recurring themes through all this, though, aren't there? And I guess that's the point of it.
Yeah, they should be mutually enforcing. Yeah, that's why I love the sketch, actually, because it's all set in the park.
Yeah.
And actually, that is one of the ways that if you look at places that have more equal well-being across the UK, they often have high engagement with their green space. And that is why, because there are those things that are happening in that space.
So, Nancy, we've touched on this a couple of times talking through this, but are there general stats that come out of the research as to how the UK compares to other European nations in our ability to manage our well-being?
So we do okay compared to lots of nations. We're definitely top third of the table in many areas. And that's partly because the context we live in is pretty good. Our national stats have some brilliant ones on sort of belonging and trust and getting on with other people as well, and happy marriages and things like that. But we're probably not top of the league when it comes across, if you're comparing across Europe. But we're probably doing better than many American states, but not on all of them as well. But I think that's something I'd love to look into. There's a new module of the European Social Survey. That's what excites me and keeps me learning, that curiosity. I'd love to dive into that a bit more.
And by doing that, it's not just about comparing us, right? It's about learning, seeing what we can take from other nations and how they manage to do so well in certain aspects.
Yeah, so this sort of example is that, and I've given a few as I talked through, but like in the UK, women people with children or people who look over the house are a lot less likely to take notice than in other parts of Europe. And that's really interesting to me, because young women's mental health is also really, really bad at the moment, and going the wrong direction. So there's something going on there that we haven't quite got right. So the bit I'm interested in is, yes, obviously understanding this, but then I'm really interested in understanding what organisations in business, charities and government can do to improve lives, as well as just making this available generally so that people can make great choices.
Delving into all of these 5 different ways has definitely clarified a lot for me, because as we talked about at the beginning, well-being can be so large. So to have it broken down into these ways, and of course there are other aspects that build in, but to have these five key elements to think about is it's really helpful.
I just find them really practical. I can remember them on my fingers, and they're really good. I think the one that's really missing that people mention most to me is sleep.
That's interesting.
But obviously exercise and being active helps with sleep as well. Yeah.
I can see Jono's face. There's a sketch on that.
No, I was just thinking when it is getting rather late.
Now, Nancy, what are you working on at the moment? Anything interesting that we might see in our public domain?
The UK has just revised its indicators of its UK measures of national wellbeing have just been revised and updated for the indicators changed for the first time in over 10 years. So that came out last Wednesday.
Oh, right.
Yeah, and we're about to start looking at creativity coming up as well. That's quite exciting. But there's loads happening. Lots on loneliness as well. Hopefully tackling that loneliness, particularly those 500,000 extra people who are feeling more chronically lonely than before the pandemic.
Nancy, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a real pleasure having you on. And Jono, I'm sure it's really nice for you as well to have been let off from being the relative expert on the podcast.
No, I was going to say, it's really nice to have the chance to hear from you on a professional basis. You absolutely have an answer to every question. I've got like 50 more things we could talk about, which obviously we won't, because it's gone on really long and it's getting late. But it's so nice to hear all this knowledge and to share it and to be working on such a great mission.
Finally, listeners, if you'd like to explore more of the work that Nancy and her colleagues are involved in, you can head to whatworkswellbeing.org. Don't forget, we'll be going through your correspondence from the last week in just a tick, but otherwise, that's us for this week's topic, the 5 ways to wellbeing. And believe me, there are thousands of different wellbeing quotes I could use to steer us out of this episode, but I'm pretty sure you've all seen the majority of them already, posted over the top of tranquil, faded seascapes on social media. So instead, I'll just say, go well, stay well. Cheers. Goodbye.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
All right, my lovelies, just me again to go through the post bag this week. I'm not going to do it on that accent. That's just silly. What were we on? Last week was our quickfire round on words and language and grammar, all that kind of stuff. There was a whole host of different things in there, but words seemed like a fairly appropriate word to describe what we're going to be talking about. Anyway, a few messages from you all to go through. So we've had a message from Susan on Twitter who says, I am an amateur writer. Now, this refers to the discussion we had about Jono's sketch, explaining the difference between amateur and professional, but amateur in the true meaning of the word, which I really, really enjoyed understanding that. So Susan is an amateur writer, a lover of writing. But she goes on to say, and I'm with you, Rob. It's the eyes. It's the eyes. Which refers to the chat I had with Tommy, trying to explain how I am going to remember now the difference between compliment with an I and compliment with an E. It's all in the eyes. And a few people have talked to me about that conversation I had with them. It still makes me laugh. Moving on, we've had a couple of messages about the chat we had covering pleonasms. So we had an email from Sally who says, one of my worsties is 2 twins instead of a set of twins. 2 twins equals 4 people. I agree. Or just twins, Twins is 2 people. A pair of twins, that again is 4 people. I know what you mean, Sally. And finally, a message from Rich saying, another one that I'm going to rephrase what Rich says. Another one that annoys me is forward planning. It's just planning. Now, I'm aware that I probably use pleonasms a lot, and I probably have done in the episode that you've just been talking about, but at least now I know about it, and I know what they're called. Great. Thank you very much for all of those. Next week will be episode 16, and it's going to be our final episode in this series. We're going to take a few weeks off just to refresh. But never fear, we'll be back in the autumn, ready to dive into more of Jono's sketches. So I think what we'll do next week is a little kind of roundup, highlights type podcast, with maybe a couple of relevant sketches thrown in there as well. Something to look forward to, I'm sure. Thank you all again for listening, and thank you for your correspondence. Keep it coming in. See you next week. All music on this podcast series is sourced from the very talented Frank Cinelli. And you can find loads more tracks at frankcinelli.com.